Let's get started. So, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar, where we're going to be talking about an EV roadmap for strata. Very topical at the moment, and we've got some great conversations to be had this afternoon. But before I get into the agenda, I'll just go through some housekeeping. So today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch this recording. We'll send it around after. And we'll also send around the slides and any questions that are raised as well. Now, in the bottom of your screens, you should see a Q&A box. So if you have any questions as we go through the webinar, please do pop them in that Q&A box. We're going to have some time at the end of the webinar, and we'll be answering some of those questions live. If we don't get to them, we'll get them sent out in a follow-up email. So yes, please use the Q&A box for any questions. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the land that I'm joining you from today, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and just wanted to pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us on the call today as well. And for our agenda, we've got a pretty jam-packed agenda. We're going to be talking about the benefits of being EV ready, any barriers to implementation. We're also going to be talking about a roadmap for strata, and then we're going to go into a panel discussion. And we've got three fantastic people on the panel. We've got Mel, Nathan, and David, and I'll introduce them properly when we get to the panel discussion, but they're here to share their insights of how they did EV charging in their apartment buildings in Sydney. And then we'll jump into the questions part at the end as well. So like I said, if you do have any questions, please pop them in that Q&A box, and we'll have plenty of time to answer those at the end. So first of all, I'm going to throw to my colleague, Chris, and he is going to take us through some of the benefits, barriers, and also the roadmap to EV charging in strata. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Elsa. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today talking about the benefits and challenges of EV charging in apartment buildings and how to get your building EV ready. Before we start, and to put things in context, we should highlight that the City of Sydney is committed to becoming a net zero city by 2035. This will require a significant shift in transport to walking, cycling, and public transport, as well as the electrification of vehicles and greening of the grid. So EVs are an important part of this transition. However, they're not the only part of the solution. So the benefits. There are significant environmental and economic benefits associated with installing EV charging, along with the opportunity to upgrade and future-proof your building. Some environmental benefits can include providing a cleaner, greener living space for residents. By replacing ICE vehicles with EVs in your building, it can help cut carbon emissions and reduce reliance on fossil fuels and improve air quality by reducing exhaust fumes. Some of the economic benefits relating to EVs include lower maintenance costs and savings in fuel. However, it can also be a gateway for some buildings to manage their energy use more efficiently, especially if load management software is installed alongside your EV chargers. EV charging can also help boost property values. Domain research tells us that units with energy efficient features in Sydney are known to sell for a premium with a price difference of 12%, which is an additional $72,000 for a unit in Sydney. So green homes attract more attention from buyers and sell quicker than homes without green features. Another major benefit of installing EV charging is staying ahead of the curve and future-proofing your building. So under the National Construction Code, all new apartment buildings have to be EV ready. So the older buildings are at risk of being left behind. If your building doesn't adapt, it could impact its appeal to future buyers and renters. So it's clear there's lots of benefits to installing EV chargers. However, I think we all know there's some barriers to consider. So the barriers to implementation. Can we skip back a slide there? Benefits and barriers.
Yeah, sorry, it's just a bit slow, Chris. My bad. There you go.
Thank you. So yeah, the barriers. Um, Residents' appetite and attitudes to EVs can differ within buildings. So it's important to understand the appetite for EV charging in a building before embarking on detailed modelling and electrical assessments. One way to do this is undertake a survey of people's attitudes towards EVs, for example. Fairness can be a barrier. Some residents might see charging infrastructure as unfair. The OC may have to manage competing priorities from residents who have a car space versus those that don't have a car space, or owners versus renters, as well as the use of visitor parking spaces, where a change of use may be under consideration. So concerns around insurance and fire risks can also become a barrier. It's important to discuss any fears or uncertainty about electrical capacity, insurance, and fire risks at the earliest stage of planning for EV chargers. The researchers and experts from the Australian Building Code Board and EV FireSafe agree that the likelihood of fire is low. However, if a fire does occur, it can have greater consequences than traditional ICE vehicle fires. For those interested in the research, you can look up EV FireSafe on the web. EV FireSafe is funded by the Department of Defence to research EV battery fires and the emergency response. They have a really great short video on their website that presents the stats in Australia, and we'll share the link to this resource in the link following up after the webinar. The research shows that there's been very few plug-in EV battery fires in Australia to date, 8 to be exact. Of those, only one was connected to charging on a street outside the owner's home, but the connection to charging was coincidental and didn't actually cause the fire. So EV FireSafe tells us the 4 leading causes are road traffic collisions, submersion in floodwaters, vehicles on recall, and vehicles exposed to another fire. EV FireSafe also helped the Australian Building Codes Board develop guidance to support safer EV charging, which we encourage you to take a look at, and we'll add it to the link in the follow-up notes after the webinar. Fire authorities, on the other hand, such as Fire and Rescue New South Wales, have taken a more precautionary approach and believe EVs and related infrastructure should be considered special hazards. Their guidelines reflect this status, and although these aren't legally binding at this point in time, we recognise that the AFAC guidelines can have a quasi-regulatory impact on decision making. Every car park is different, and ultimately it's up to the strata committee to decide whether to install EV infrastructure or not. Again, we would invite you to look at the research to make an informed decision and involve your local fire crews to attend your site and develop a pre-incident plan, or a PIP. Regarding insurance, because there's been so few cases of EV battery fires in Australia, there hasn't been enough evidence for the insurance industry, which is accident driven, to have a firm stance on EVs and EV chargers. Some insurers have specific requirements for EV charging, like installing phone packs above car spaces with EV charge points, or limiting the number of EVs that can be charged on any one floor in a car park. Please check with your existing insurer on any requirements they may have for EV charging infrastructure, and if necessary, shop around. Regarding energy loads and electricity capacity, this could also become a barrier. However, through discussions with Ausgrid and EV assessors, the majority of buildings should have sufficient electrical capacity. However, some of our older buildings may require electrical upgrades. Every building is different, so it's best to check your capacity with a licensed electrician and contact Ausgrid, who have further details and the appropriate application forms on their website to check your capacity. The next big barrier is cost. Any building should consider both the CapEx, or the capital costs, and the OpEx, or the maintenance costs, before installing EV charging infrastructure. The first step will require an EV feasibility assessment to assess the available electrical capacity of your building, and this will help you determine the costs involved. The CapEx costs will depend on the complexity of the infrastructure required and will depend on things like the need for a main switchboard upgrade, new supply metering, new distribution boards, the car space distance from the common distribution board, the length of conduits, and the number of car park levels. The maintenance or OPEX costs can also vary depending on equipment installed, such as billing software, demand management software, Wi-Fi subscriptions, and maintaining the actual physical equipment itself. With many different options becoming available in the market for both Type 1 and Type 2 charging technologies, it may be difficult for OCs to compare quotes and prices. So to avoid confusion, an independent feasibility assessment is recommended. So onto the roadmap, step by step. The first step is to undertake a resident survey. Find out what residents think. A quick survey can gauge interest and highlight any concerns early. Consider any grants available at this stage, like the City Green Building grants. The New South Wales EV Ready website also has a handy survey template that you can use. Undertake an energy assessment is the next step. Check your building's historical peak energy load. Look at 12 months of bills and look at the energy use patterns of your building. You can also do some data logging and, if needed, work with an expert energy assessor. Evaluate your options. So there's no single approach that fits all buildings. So your options may range from individual level 1 chargers from standard power points to level 2 chargers with dedicated EV supply equipment, or a phased approach with EV backbone infrastructure. The next step is to look at payment options. There's two main ways to recover EV charging costs, and that's via usage billing for the kilowatt hours consumed, or cost recovery from strata provided equipment. There's a good description of these different options on the New South Wales Government's EV Ready Building website, and I'm sure we'll hear about it further in the panel discussion. Bylaws. So it's likely that you'll need new bylaws when you're considering EV charging. New South Wales Government has examples of motions and bylaws for the installation of and management of electric vehicle chargers on their website, but you may decide to engage a lawyer to draft these up, depending on the complexity of what you're looking at to install in your building. And finally, a planning application. Installing EV charging units is exempt development under the New South Wales planning controls. However, if you're unsure of your building's existing DA conditions, you can organise a pre-DA meeting with our city planners to discuss your building's background and proposed approach. That will help guide you in preparing a DA if required. So what we've found is that buildings are all different and there's no one size fits all solution. For example, some buildings are looking at independent type 1 chargers, where other buildings are looking at a backbone infrastructure where the OC funds the main setup and residents pay for the final connection to their car parking spot. Other buildings have installed shared chargers that can be booked via an app. So the best approach depends on your specific building. Consider what other buildings have done and undertake your own feasibility assessment. We can help with this through our green building grants. So the City of Sydney has a green building grants program which supports owners corporations undertaking electrification feasibility assessments. We can look at hot water heat pumps, but we also include EV charging studies. We'll include a link to this in our follow-up email. Applications to this latest round opened yesterday, and they will remain open until the 11th of March, so please consider applying. And please note, if this round is too early for you and you're not ready to submit an application, there'll be another round opening in August. Thanks for listening, and back to you, Elsa.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. All right, now we are going to move into the panel section of this webinar. So I would like to introduce our three fantastic panel members. So first up, we have Mel, who is the building manager of Verve Apartments in Erskineville. Then we have Nathan, who is the Strata Committee Chair at Zinc in Alexandria. And last but not least, David, who is on the Strata Committee at Reflections in Piermont. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really, really glad to have you here. And I'm going to kick us off with a bit of an easy question. I want to know about your building. So tell us about your building, the age, the number of apartments, parking spaces. Give us a little bit of context so we can visualize your building. Mel, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I'm the building manager at Verve Apartments in Erskineville. Our building was built in 2009, which is about 16 years old. We've got about 102 units with 74 car spaces. And yeah, that's a bit about our building.
Fantastic. And when did you install EV charging infrastructure, Mel?
That was in March, April 2022.
Great. And what kind of infrastructure did you install?
So we did the full hog. We installed all the backbone. We did all the cable trays. We installed a new DB because we've got 2 levels of basements. We've obviously only got one on level 1, and pretty much got everything together for the whole of the building instead of just installing in 1 or 2 pieces. It was all ready to go for all the residents when they're ready to install their EVs.
Fantastic. And we'll definitely come back and ask more on that in a moment. Nathan, I'm going to throw it to you. So tell us a bit about Zinc, number of apartments, parking spaces, and about your EV infrastructure as well.
Yeah, so there's 45 apartments. There are 30 parking spaces, of which 5 are for visitors and the balance dedicated to individual apartments. Across that, we've got 10 chargers, and it's conveniently set up so that just about every space has got access to 2 chargers.
Great.
The flat cable solution, and it's future-proof for future expansion.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, David, tell us a bit about Reflections and the kind of setup that you have there.
Reflections, we've got 10 stories, 78 units. There are about 100 parking spaces because some people have got 2 spots. And we've basically done a full installation across. In other words, everybody's got the facility there to have a charger. We did that, I guess, two and a half years ago. It was completed 2.5 years ago. The investigation, we were very early on investigating all this, and we started around about 2019. So it took us about 4 years to get to the final installation. But we were certainly at the pointy end of all this, where there was very little knowledge out there and a lot of disinformation, which was quite a hazard to us in getting the body corporate across the line. But eventually everything happened, and we're now in a foolproof situation for the next how many years?
Fantastic. And that leads really nicely into my next question. And David, I'll start with you on this one. Is how did the topic of EV charging in your building first come up? So who initiated that conversation first of all?
Well, apart from the logics of having EV and the environment and things like that, one of the things that were our main drivers was the increase in value or the increase in desirability of the property, as Chris had just talked about. And the basis of the BCA requirement and the national code for all new buildings was on the basis that, well, that's going to leave us behind when people are in desirability and value of the property. So that I guess was the initial driving force in thinking of that we didn't want to be left behind in all this, and that's what started it all.
Yeah, fantastic. And Nathan, was that a similar kind of topic of how it came up in your building as well, or did it come up in a different way?
It was there was a particular advocate that led the charge, and then that was backed up by a survey that What Block did for us, just to put some facts around that advocacy, what people were likely to do at what point in the future, gauging the level of interest, such like, and then we built on it from there. Understood what the right solution was for us, and then how we were going to implement that.
Yeah, great. And Mel, how did the topic first come up over in Verve?
Well, I sort of echo Nathan and David's comments, very similar. And we also got a What Block survey as well, which was fantastic. But we installed solar in 2018. So we're already sort of on that Ferris wheel, if you want to call it that, of sustainability. And then very similar to David, I think a lot of people were wanting to, put that little bit more value on their property as well. So it was sort of a mixed combination.
Yeah, fantastic. And how did you figure out in Verve if installing EV chargers was even possible? Did you already know the building's electrical capacity, or talk us through how you went down that journey?
Not at all. I'm very, very similar to, I'm sure, my other panelists, that we didn't really know very much about it, and things have changed completely since when we've installed our EV infrastructure. But we decided to go with What Block, who put our report and audit together of the building, and that helped us so much because they're in the building. So I think it's really important, either you start your survey first, just to check that your residents want that in your building, and secondly, go straight for that survey, because even though you may think you know what you're talking about, I think that survey really opens your eyes about what's going on in your particular building as well.
Yeah, great. And Nathan, is that similar over in Zinc? How did you figure out that EV charging was possible in your building?
Lots of questions, and it's much easier now than it was then, similar to Mel. Ultimately came back to, engaged Ethan from Sustainability Now, ultimately to turn it into something digestible for me, which was basically a graph that said it got a red line at the top, which was your building peak capacity, and then what we actually did over a typical 24-hour period. From there, we knew and understood clearly that we were lucky that we had significant capacity in the building. Equally, though, we played the conservative card and then put some load management software in there as well, so that nothing could compromise that in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. And David, how about you? How did you figure out if EV was possible over in Reflections?
What I think our building is probably similar to many others in that the supply current to the building from the substation is subdivided into basically non-essential services, essential services, and the tenancies were a separate thing. So I started measuring that way back in 2018 in terms of what our peak loads were. We had quite a good idea of what the building loads were, but what we didn't know, of course, was the tenancies in that's the retail side of it, was functioning on the basis of hot weather and air conditioning and things like that. So we then actually installed a logger, which then logged all those three components of the supply current and gave us a good idea of where we were, to basically find out that we, even on a peak period like today, which would be a peak period, where our common property electricity is straight lining. It doesn't fluctuate very much at all. It's the lights and the air conditioning, water cooling towers, and the swimming pool and things like that. But of course, the tenancies peak because of the air conditioning. But even at that, the worst case scenario that we ever encountered only catered for about 25% of the maximum load that we could encounter with the building. So we did then a check that what was shown and what was on the ground was also applied at the substation through Ausgrid, because that was a critical situation that we didn't know whether Ausgrid had throttled our supply down because we're only using 25% of it. Only to find that everything was all go. So we've never actually gone above 20% of the maximum
Okay.
demand
Thanks,
that we'd
David.
ever have on the building. So it didn't have a problem. Once some of those facts and figures were analysed and put in place. And we did a similar thing where we got Brent Clark to do a survey of our residents. I might add that that was including the renters, because they're about a 40% base of the building. We're in a situation where a renter can actually bring a charger in and connect to it, so it gives a whole dynamic of the whole building, not just the owners.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. And Mel, I just wanted to double back to you. I know you said you installed solar on your building. Is the solar powering the EV charging, or what's the link with that? Or is that something you'd like to see in the future? Talk us to us a bit about that.
Yeah, so currently it's not linked with the EV chargers, but this is something we're looking into this year.
Oh, great. Fantastic. And I forgot to ask all of you, how many EV chargers do you currently have in your building at the moment? And we'll start with you, Mel.
We've got 3.
3 at the moment. Nathan? Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say that's in private.
Yep. Okay, great. And Nathan?
10 level 2 chargers, and they
10.
are linked to our common solar.
They are linked to the solar. Could you tell us a little bit about that and your experience of, I guess, linking the two together?
It was very straightforward because we'd done the solar and in advance of the EV chargers. The common area solar, we've subsequently put some solar in for the apartment use, but that's a separate conversation. What it did allow us to do, we charge on a user pays basis. So however many kilowatts you use, you pay a set rate, which is what we've as a committee have set, and that is we just pick the shoulder rate. So and that's worked out fine. Every now and again we'll go and review it. It's not a dynamic rate, so that's worked out fine. So that people charging peak rates or not, then it covers our costs.
Yeah. Okay, great. And David, how many chargers do you have over at Reflections?
4.
4.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, my next question is around keeping things fair or equitable. Really interested to hear all of your experience on considerations of installing shared versus private chargers, and how to make sure that everyone in the building has access to using an EV charger if they were to get an EV. So let's start with you, Nathan.
We went for the full egalitarian approach, so that meant that every space has got access to at least one, or most have got access to 2 chargers, including visitor spaces. If you're in an apartment with your own space, or if they contributed an equal amount as if per visitor space, which the owners corporation contributed to for the capital cost, and then it's just a user pays basis from there on in.
Great. And how does that user pay work? Like, what's the infrastructure, or talk to us a bit about that.
It's a billing system by the provider. It happens that this is the chargers that we've got a Tesla, but it could be any other charger. They work on all cars. So we've set the rate. If you've got a Tesla car, then it just works in the background. It's similar to an Uber on an account link basis. If you haven't got a Tesla, then you just get the Tesla app and then you just open it up, tap it on the charger, and that'll bill you for however many kilowatt hours you charge on that particular session. And then that gets that amount minus a tiny admin charge gets rebated from Tesla as a service provider to us back into the owners corporation.
Okay, great. Thank you. And David, how about you in your building? How did you keep things fair and making sure that, everyone could access a charger if they wanted to?
Well, it's pretty well the same as Nathan in terms that we adopted the principle that we didn't want, as a committee or as a strata manager or as a building manager, to have anything to do with this in terms of it wasn't within our there was no benefit to managing a situation whereby there was a common charger where you had to manage it. So we looked at putting charges for everybody in their own cost basis. So all that happens is the person buys the charger, connects to the system. It's all done through software, through a RFID card. Personal accounts on much the same as the lots are with their own individual meters, and we then get we charge out a rate that is decided at our AGM every year. The difference between the buying rate of our electricity of the body corporate is therefore considered as a profit. It's not really, it's a cost recovery for the installation. And that rate is set on an annual basis. And the software company that we're employed to do that work just then sends a check every month on the difference between the two. We don't, as a committee or as a strata manager, have any involvement other than receiving the money. So that was the main point in not having to manage a communal charging point, if you like, where in our case it's just a straight owner's car parking spot has a charger, full stop, and they're the only ones that can use it because it's tied into their own RFID card. So it works fine.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And Mel, in Verve, is that something similar, how it works over there?
Something very similar. Originally, we wanted to start with just 3 of our lockable bollards visitor spaces. And then we obviously came to the decision, very much like David, that we wanted everybody to have the chance to be able to install that EV charger. So that's when we obviously put the whole infrastructure in for everybody.
Yeah, great. And is it up to each owner to then choose their charger if they wanted a high or low speed charger, or is there a requirement that, you know, the OC has on what they can install?
Of course. So we have a bylaw that specifically says what charger to use, which is one we have arranged through the provider Jet Charge, who do Charge Fox, which is generally across most of supermarkets like Broadway Shopping Centre, because we felt after the research we had done that that was a bit more universal. So anybody who had a card, for example, at Broadway, they can still use that card in their personal EV charging spot as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. My next question is around insurance and fire safety, and just having a quick look at the chat, I can see this is quite a topical question. So were there any, first off, were there any concerns raised about fire safety and or insurance? And Mel, we'll start with you.
In particular, fire. Obviously with e-bikes and things like that going off quite often. But we did our research. So we discussed this with our fire contractor and obviously our Jet Charge, who supplied and installed all our infrastructure as well. So we made sure we crossed all our I's and T's before moving forward, and then obviously presented that in our building reports and that all our residents have access to. So they've got that information as well.
Great. And were there any, I guess, issues with insurance premiums?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. David, same questions over to you. Were there any concerns about fire safety and or insurance at Reflections?
There were, in terms of that, there was a lot of myths out there in terms of where anybody mentions a lithium-ion fire, they immediately hop on the concept that it's the EV car. And we actually employed Emma Sutcliffe from EV to look at the situation from our point of view. We had no there was, from all the statistics, there has never been an electric car catch fire from a charging point of view. So we didn't have any. As I say, there are a load of myths out there that it's far more dangerous for an EV bike, an electric bike, where the owner's got his battery in his unit charging off his own unit, whereas our whole situation, it's got RBO protections on the sold onto AS3000 electricity, so we don't have any of that. We did then get the fire brigade round to do their inspection. They are a compliance authority anyway, so they don't make any decisions whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. But what it does do is that they've got a full knowledge of our building, how it's set up. That's all put onto their database, so that any potential fire, any smoke alarm that goes off, they're fully aware of where everything is, and there is no difference whether it's an electric car or an internal combustion. In fact, a lot of the statistics say that are true, that internal combustion engines are 100 times more likely to catch fire than electric cars. So you go through all that sort of, say, myth and one or two of the insurance companies did talk about it, but we've gone past that stage. There's absolutely no problem.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. And Nathan, in your building, any issues around insurance or fire safety?
The risk of being excessively breathed, no and no. However, what we did do was, in advance of the general meeting, when we formally put this presented and put this to a vote, we did share some information pack just to address the issues, put some of the myths and misconceptions to bed, and obviously made sure that we'd done our checks and balances with the insurance company as well, so we can answer the questions before they got asked.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely good to get ahead of the questions and address them before they come up. So that's great. Thank you. All right, my next question is around how your EV charging projects were financed. So really interested to hear if there were special levies raised or if it was included in the Capital Works Fund. Just some information. I think our listeners really want to know how to finance these sort of projects. So Mel, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Of course. So obviously before we installed, like any of us, we looked and researched. So once we realized how much we were looking at, we budgeted that. And then we obviously didn't raise any special levies. We had that in our Capital Works Fund. So that's how we funded.
Great. Were there any sort of pushbacks to that being installed, or everyone on board with that?
Or probably maybe 1%.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
Yeah, okay, great. And Nathan, how about you? How was the project financed over at Zinc?
We did it as a special levy, not because there wasn't sufficient funds in the Capital Works Fund, but more, again, just from an appropriateness perspective. So for the residents that had spaces attached to their lots, it was fair that they should pay accordingly. And then for those that didn't, then they still got the option to use the visitor spaces as appropriate. And then the Owners Corporation funded the share for the visitor spaces.
Yeah, great. And David, how about you?
Yeah, we did the same thing. It came, the money actually came out of the sinking fund, but the basis of it, we over the years we've done a lot of upgrades with things like LED lighting and VSDs on all the motors, and you could basically set a payback period on all those things. With EV charging, it was difficult to let owners know what the payback period was, because we don't know how many EVs are going to go on charge to make the payback period. But everybody came on board eventually, realizing that at some point in time, which might be 20 years away, of course, or whatever, but at some point in time, the capital costs will be covered by the sinking fund. Bearing in mind we've got a 15-year sinking fund forecast, which we analyse every year, so we're on top of all the other types of things that are based in the capital works fund. So yeah, there's been no problem with that.
Fantastic. And I guess that leads nicely on to my next question. And I'll start with you, David, is how's the project been received by residents? I know you mentioned that you had quite a high owner-renter split and you also surveyed your renters, but how has this been received by residents and also any prospective buyers or renters as well?
Yeah, we've had no virtual. I'd say the same amount, probably. There was about 1% that really, based on such myths as well. The electric car's not only got a short life; hydrogen will come in and all things like that. All things that you had to navigate through to get. But basically, there's been no pushbacks at all, and it's some people are not still convinced that it's the way of the future or whatever, the electric car, but nobody's really been, because it all gets back to the value of your property, lot owners, and as Chris said originally, you're talking, if you're talking $17,000 or $20,000 increase in your value, is no brainer to not go down that track. So we've had virtually no problems in there.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. Nathan, how about you? How's it been received by residents? And do you have any renters using this service?
Received well by residents. The only thing I'll say is that personally slightly disappointed about the amount of EVs in the building, not as forecast, but there's been some economic pressures that are impacting a lot of people, which I guess have slowed that down, but that'll come in due course.
Yeah.
Couple of people in the building have got EVs, and there's visitor spaces kept sort of fairly regular use actually, from visitors as well, rather than just people living in the building that don't have their own car space. So that's been quite pleasing.
And talk to us a bit more about visitors coming in and using them. How does that work with billing?
Same as they what they would do, they have to just download an app, plug the car in, and then there's literally just as you would with your bank card or your phone, you just tap that on the charging unit, creates the association, and then gets billed back to that individual, and then the OC gets reimbursed that amount.
Great, fantastic. And Mel, how about you? How has it been received by residents over in Verve and any prospective buyers or renters?
Oh, extremely well. One of the EV chargers that were installed at the time, the unit got sold, and it went. I think it was around about the $900,000 mark. It went for 1.2. And that's because it had the EV charger installed. So I think prospective buyers and people that want to sell their units in the future, I think this is a major excitement for everybody at Verve. Obviously, the sustainability for us was more the drive, but I think more and more people are going, this is going to be great for our units in the future for selling prices as well. So I think that's really fueled people a little bit more as well.
Definitely, and like Chris mentioned before, there was the Domain report that came out in 2024, which says, units with green features, which obviously includes EV charging, do increase the property value by up to $70,000. So yeah, definitely
100%.
contributing to that.
And that's helped us obviously as well. I know we're not discussing this, but obviously with our NAMERS rating as well, that's really pushed, I think, everybody at Verve to really strive to get us into that point of 6 out of 6 numbers for our neighbours.
Fantastic. All right, I have one more question left for all of you, and that is, what advice do you have for other apartment buildings who are pursuing EV charging or about to start their EV charging journey? And Mel, I'll start with you.
100%, I would get an audit report done. If maybe first do your survey, to make sure you don't want to waste your time on spending money on your report. But I will do those two things first. Do your survey, make sure that everybody wants EVs in your building. And secondly, get that report done, because it'll tell you about Ausgrid, about if you need a new DB because you've got 2 levels of parking space. It really shows you what you actually need and what sort of infrastructure you'll need. And that will help you budget or understand what you actually need for your building.
Fantastic. That's great advice, Mel. Thank you. David, what's your one piece of advice that you'd have for other apartment buildings?
I think the same as Mel, actually, in terms that the technical investigation is important in the first place to get that all sorted out and make sure, for instance, if we'd have had to upgrade our main switchboard, then there would have been no question that the job wouldn't have gone ahead, because nobody had the appetite to close the building down for 24 hours to do the switchboard. So that there are all those situations, but that's the most plus the other thing was, as Mel said, was the investigation into the residents' attitude towards it, and making sure that, say, we use Brent Clark to do the survey for us on that, to make sure that we got the backing of the residents, and that basically turned out around about 70-odd%. And the other great thing, of course, is that when the new strata laws came out with regard to EV charging, where you only need 50% at an AGM to get approval, was an enormous boost as well, knowing full well that we'd get it through, because most of the people that attended the AGM were the ones in favour of doing the EV. But so there was no real problem once we got the backing of the majority of the people.
Great, thank you. And Nathan, last but not least, what advice do you have for other apartment buildings?
I think I said you'd be surprised how simple it can be. Hand on heart, and there's solutions out there now, you could, given that cars spend 95% of their time sitting doing nothing, appropriate 10 amp GPO that everyone can plug into is going to circumnavigate a lot of the infrastructure issues. It'll be a lot cheaper, so you circumnavigate the finance issues, and you can still have a user pays basis with some QR code and software as a service solutions. So I think as a minimum, if people at least start with that in mind, then you can see what that costs you, and then you just scale up according to what people think they might need. But once people have actually had an EV and driven it and charged it, they'll understand that you don't need to charge, at breakneck speed overnight when your car's doing nothing at home.
Fantastic. Thank you. Great pieces of advice there. So thank you again to all 3 of you for sharing your experiences in your building, and also, your advice for other apartment buildings. Really appreciate it. I can see we've had a number of questions that have come in. Myself and my colleague Kaylee have been keeping an eye on the chat, so we might just get through a few of these questions, and feel free to jump in. Slightly kind of off topic on this one, but I think it's still relevant to talk about, and I'll throw this out to any of the panel members. Have any of your residents expressed interest in having a dedicated e-bike storage charging area, or has it just been around EV cars?
Ours is just around cars, unfortunately.
Just cars? Nathan and David, I'm seeing some nods as well.
Same. It's been quiet, but if we could provide for that, we probably should. So we should probably get on the front foot with that one.
It's definitely something that I've been hearing more of from building managers in apartment buildings, and just having a space to do that. Kaylee, have you seen any other questions pop up in the chat that we can fire off?
There was one there about the use of the car parking spaces and what you would do about changing that if they're becoming EV dedicated or if they're still general. I think maybe Chris Monroe, do you want to answer that one about the use of the car park spaces?
Yeah, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, just about if you're changing the use of your car park spaces to become dedicated EV charging, or if you leave it as a general car park space, and what's involved if you did want to change the use.
Yes. So in relation to visitor parking spaces, so some buildings, I guess, again, it's different for every building. Some buildings have lots of car spaces for visitors. Other buildings have minimal space or no space. So depending on the building, if your building has DA conditions for when the building was built, you'd need to check those and see what they say about your visitor car parking spaces. And then on the back of that investigation, they may have a condition where you'll need to explore changing the use of those visitor parking spaces. And that would be a conversation with the planners here at the city about the best pathway forward there. And I think in regards to technology, it would be a matter of investigating the various opportunities on the marketplace for installing the appropriate infrastructure. So I know there's things on the market that are tap and go for people to use, like Nathan has explained. So yeah, that it would be up to the OC to explore the various technology that's available.
Nice, thanks, Grace. Another question that came in, and one for the panelists, is did you experience any trouble with vandalism once the EV charging infrastructure was installed?
Not at all. For us, we didn't install each individual EV charger. So that's the cost to the owner. We just did the infrastructure itself. But with the EVs that are actually installed presently, no vandalism at all.
Nice. Nathan or David, anything?
No.
Sorry, David.
So we don't have any problem along those lines either. In that it's all a secure underground parking situation that and under camera surveillance 24/7. So there is no. It's difficult for people to get in without their fobs and things like that. In any case, so we don't have that problem.
That makes sense.
Yeah, zero from me. The only minor gripe I've got for a bit of fun is that sometimes the cables aren't quite neat enough when people hang them back. That's more about me than the other users, but
we'll forgive
that
them
sounds
that.
like something that I would say too.
Cool, thanks guys. Another one that came in is, what are the pitfalls in either installing the infrastructure or managing it when it's installed up and running? So maybe was there any unexpected hiccups that you came across, or anything you'd like to pre-warn people about just with the installation?
We've had zero issues in either the administration, the infrastructure, the maintenance, the use, even questions about how to put a couple of signs up around the building, and then a couple of step guides. And it's been, where are we now? Nearly 3 years in, zero issues.
I guess
Nice.
the only thing that I would make comment is I echo obviously that as well, but we didn't have a lot of the infrastructure. So we had some trays already in, but not enough. So we obviously needed to install more cable trays. So you'd probably want to make sure that you've got enough cable trays to obviously facilitate that as well. So that'd be all your cables, internet connection, etc., like that, from your car spot to your DB, which is your on each of your levels.
Brilliant. Yeah.
We've had no problem with that in it at all, in terms of it's purely an electrical connection that's based on AS3000, and there is no real maintenance required with it. Each one of the chargers are OPCC connectable through there, so there's been absolutely no difference to any other of the electrical connections in the buildings.
Brilliant. Cool. Yeah, that's some good tips there between the cable trays, and putting up signage around the building as well around EV charging is a good tip as well. There was a couple of questions there around the the power logging and the feasibility study that some of you mentioned in your answers there, and getting that audit done. And just to tie that back with the green building question that was there about the roadmap as well, the city supports that feasibility stage. So the initial review of your building and auditing and the power consumption and what you'd need and the electrical capacity. So our green building grant program does help the building to bring in a technical assessor of their choice to review the building. And we'll send out more information about that in our follow-up email. And I also saw just a quick question there about an EV survey example, and we will definitely send that out as a resource as well that you can use in your buildings. Just thought I'd pop in and answer those ones. But then back to the other Q&As, there was one about, did all of these projects come within the existing capacity limit of the building, or did you need to upgrade the capacity of your supply or maybe your switchboards? So I'll pass that back to the panel. Do you want to jump in maybe, Mel? Yep.
So we obviously have, like all buildings, a DB, which is where your power supply is. Because we've got 2 levels of basements, we did have to install a smaller DB on level 2, which obviously is better for the load, but also for cable installation. So we haven't got people on basement level 2 needing to run a cable all the way from level 1 down to level 2. So that's where we installed that.
Brilliant. David, do you want to jump in on that one?
No, we didn't have, so our main switchboard feeds DBs on different levels, and our installation is such that it goes right to the car parking spot, so everything's in place. It goes back to the main switchboard, which has got a breaker on the main switchboard, which the fire brigade are all aware of. It's well signposted if they ever needed to switch that off. One thing I guess that I have a problem with is that many of these fire companies tend to hop on the bandwagon. For instance, one we encountered where one fire company was saying we need new fire extinguishers to cope with the electric cars. Well, again, it's all myths that we don't need in this sort of scenario. So, and the latest one that I've heard is that they're requiring an automatic switch to be connected to the fire panel if there's a fire in the building, that automatically switches off the EV charging. I haven't got no intention of getting my head around it, but I just don't understand any logic in turning off EV charging when you've got, you know, things like 55 kilowatt motors running at the same time. Why switch that off when everything is automatically switched off if there is a fire in that cabling scene, whatever. So yeah. Again, it's myths that cause the big problem with all this.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely important to have the right information to hand to make a good decision. Cool. I think we're almost at time, but Nathan, if you want to wrap up with this question.
Well within existing building capacity, but when you see a graph for your building's consumption, you'll see there's an enormous peak in the obvious time in the evening, and your load management software can iron that out. What does that mean? It means it just stops you, if required, it'll stop your EVs charging during that period, then automatically turn them back on. So you don't have to design your entire solution around a very tiny peak. You can have the software that takes care of it and reduce your costs significantly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And again, it goes back to getting that audit done to see your power consumption at different hours. Thanks very much, guys. That was brilliant. I'll just pass to Elsa to have a final word, I think.
Fabulous. Thank you. And look, thank you again for joining this lunchtime, and a huge thank you again to our wonderful panelists. Kaylee's just going to throw up a quick poll. Just let us know if you found this session useful or not. She'll just launch that now. We'll send around an email with a link to this recording, and also we've got a really great set of resources as well, which we'll share, and also a link to the application page for the Green Building Grants, which is open, and you can definitely get an electric vehicle feasibility study done through those. So thank you again. We hope you found the session useful. If you have any further questions for either the City of Sydney or our panelists, just reply to the email and we're happy to field the questions out to who it's relevant. Thank you again. Have a really, really lovely afternoon and stay cool out there. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.